I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Welcome to Friday. We're starting tonight with a journey into the culture wars. You know, the arguments over who should be able to do what. Well, tonight we're focusing on books. That makes it our big story. In the past few years, arguments over which books should be allowed in school libraries has played out across the country. Books in both public and school libraries have come under attack by people who think certain things don't belong on the shelves. It is upsetting to all sides. Several librarians have quit because of the controversy. The American Library Association tracked nearly 1,600 books that were challenged in 2021. That's the highest number since they started tracking it 20 years ago. The Oregon Intellectual Freedom Clearinghouse says 54 books were challenged here in 2022. That's 3 times the number that were challenged the year before. Right now, the battle is focused in the West Linn-Wilsonville School District. A group of parents is trying to get a set of books tossed from the district libraries. Ashley Koch talked to them. We do want to warn you before this begins, the story does contain some explicit language from the books that might not be appropriate for younger viewers.
Meet Trisha Britton.
I'm a mom of 2 wonderful children who I homeschool for the very reason I'm standing here tonight.
And Kirsten Groner.
The act of being gay is a sin.
They're the moms leading the charge to ban 8 books from the West Linn-Wilsonville School District.
In November, we went and we exposed the 8 books by reading the content passages as well as sharing graphic photos within the books. This is porn and not education or even literacy.
It's just a lot of poetry about rape and getting high and shooting her dad and drugs.
She's talking about Crank by Ellen Hopkins. The 7 other books in question, The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur, Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews, Beyond Magenta by Susan Cooklin, Heartstopper Volume 2 by Alice Oseman, Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison, and Flamer by Mike Curado. They say they weren't aware of these books until recently, but started looking for objectionable books after seeing similar moves elsewhere in the country.
This is a national issue that parents have been concerned about across the nation, so there's definitely areas where you can find out about books that have been in question, and so I think we just started there.
But they've built up a small army to take on the school board, showing up to meetings and reading explicit passages from the books.
I touched Doug Goebel's and he touched mine.
Baby me. Like your mouth has a gift of reading, and I'm your favorite book. Find your favorite page in the between my legs.
That army is part of the Oregon Moms Union. The Oregon Moms Union has taken on school boards across the state to rally against COVID restrictions, vaccine mandates, new guidance on supporting transgender students, and now books. So let's take a closer look at the books they're challenging. 6 of them are by or about people of color or LGBTQ people. That follows national trends in books that are targeted, according to the American Library Association. But the West Linn-Wilsonville moms say it's not about identity.
Things that are X-rated and things that are R-rated don't belong in an entire district of children.
So you would say, like, you're okay with LGBTQ content in the library as long as it doesn't cross that sort of sexually explicit line?
I don't know that that's a question that we would need to answer.
Some parts of these books are pretty sexually explicit. We can't show them on the news. The moms say they want changes into how school library content is chosen.
We are asking for a committee to be formed with both parents and also parents and administration, as well as we've been asking for these books just to be removed.
Chelsea King is the chair of the West Linn-Wilsonville School Board.
On June 30th, when my term ends, it will have been 8 years on the school board.
She thinks the books should stay.
I am unequivocally against removing any books from our public school libraries.
She read some of the books.
The passages that were being read in the boardroom have 2 adolescent boys using slang terms for human anatomy and acts of sex. So they're using slang. And no sex ever occurs in the book.
And she thinks it's important that kids have access to them.
The book itself, at the heart of it, is a story of a cross-racial, cross-socioeconomic class friendship that really is born out of this young woman who's dying of leukemia, who at the end of the book dies of leukemia. Interestingly, an issue that we deal with in our own school district in West Linn-Wilsonville, we've had adolescents die of leukemia. Here's a book for young people who are living through that.
If parents in the district want to block access to any books for their own kids, they can ask the school's librarian not to let their kids check them out. But that block doesn't go far enough for these moms.
Her friend got it and gave it. So while I don't want my daughter with this YA book, her friend gave it to her.
And not all the school board members are on the same page.
I left the November 14th meeting deeply troubled. I do not want to be any part of exposing students to sexually explicit, obscene, and age-inappropriate reading material.
But meanwhile, students in the district say the book should stay.
After multiple discussions with students at Wilsonville High School, I've come to the conclusion that these books should remain in our libraries. I understand and appreciate the concerns of parents. However, it is not reasonable for parents to choose what other students can and cannot read.
Yes, many of the books being challenged deal with difficult topics, some even including sexual assault. But censoring and ignoring them is not the answer.
Ashley Koch, KGW News.
Right now, the books are under review. The review committee consists of a parent, teacher librarians, other educators, and people from the community. But we've learned the superintendent of the West Linn-Wilsonville School District does plan to speak about that review at next week's school board meeting. While the books are under review, they are still on the bookshelves. Now, it's your turn to weigh in. How much is too much when it comes to books at the school library? Where should the line be drawn, or should there be a line at all? Send us your thoughts. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave us a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. This next story is almost a case study in how a local headline can grab national attention and then become fodder in a feud between the right and the left. Now, some quick background. About 2 weeks ago, Walmart announced it was going to close 2 stores in Portland. They're near Delta Park and the Eastport Plaza. Walmart still has about 45 other stores in Oregon. About a dozen of those are in the greater Portland area, but they are outside the city limits. So let's start with the headlines. Our headline back then on KGW.com focused on those specific locations. We later updated the headline to show that 580 workers would be impacted, meaning they will lose their jobs. Oregon Public Broadcasting put out a similar headline, 2 Portland Walmarts to close. But Fox 12 Oregon put out a headline that stated all Portland Walmart stores to permanently close. Now, that headline is absolutely and technically accurate. But do you see how different it is from those other 2?
And in case you didn't know, headlines often start with small developments like 2 stores closing. It's sort of like the little fish in the ocean. It's happy by itself, but there's always a bigger fish that's hungry. It's the same thing in the news business. Bigger operations are always looking for news stories. And just like the little fish that gets eaten by the bigger fish, even that fish can get eaten by a still bigger fish. And small stories that start local can end up national or even international the same way.
That last fish was kind of spooky. So, if you're looking from a national perspective to grab a headline that confirms a narrative, well, that local Fox headline, darn right perfect. And that's exactly what we saw happen. A week after the first reports, Yahoo, the National Fox Business News, and the National Review all came out with headlines about the Portland Walmarts. Yahoo reported Walmart set to close all stores in Portland amid record-breaking retail theft. The Fox headline reads, Walmart to shutter Portland locations just months after CEO's warning on crime. And the National Review stated, Walmart set to close all stores in Portland amid record-breaking retail theft. Very similar to the first one there. Now listen, during an interview with NBC about a month earlier, the CEO had mentioned crime as an issue that was costing Walmart money nationally. But he did not mention Portland. And when the announcement of the store closings were made, a local Walmart spokesperson said there were many factors involved. They did not say what those factors were, but it did not matter. 2 days later, other national outlets were out running with the story. From the New York Post to the Daily Mail, and more recently, it's bounced around to big city websites. Here's the headline in Cleveland, and here it is at Cairo in Seattle just 2 days ago. All right, now let's bring in KGW's digital director, Celeste Ruiz, to talk about how these headlines can become a story of their own. How do these things take off and why?
Well, the reach of a story is really just huge now. When we're publishing a story, it can be picked up by national outlets everywhere. We have our company too, and so their stations can pull that as well. And then from there, that can go to national publications. They can publish those stories with the credit back to you. So just the reach when you're publishing these stories now can be pulled from all over the country, and that's really how they expand now. The more people share them on social media, the more attention that they'll get, and so then that really brings them to the forefront of the national spotlight from there.
And I imagine that the national groups are always looking for interesting local stuff that they can tie to a national theme of some sort?
That's right. I mean, we always get reached out. We are an NBC affiliate, so NBC News can pull some of our stories too, and they're reaching out every day. What are you working on today? So they're looking for those stories that are local but may have a national interest. Same likewise, we pull stories all the time that may be national from other stations, from our sister stations in Seattle and Idaho, that may be of interest to our readers here too. So it's that vice versa, but that's really how stories can go from a small local story to now being something that is talked about nationally because of the power of social media and sharing those stories there.
And when it comes to the print stuff, how important are those headlines?
Those headlines are super important. I mean, they can really make or break your story. It really is how people decide whether or not they're going to click on your story. And the way that social media works now too, we're always scrolling, we're always looking through our feeds. The headline sometimes may be the only thing that someone is reading out of that whole story, and that's how they're sharing that to their friends. So in those stories, in those headlines, it's hard to kind of fit that context sometimes in there too, because you've got character limits that you're hitting too. But it's part of our job to be able to have a headline that's something that is going to grab readers, but also has context and accuracy and facts included in there too and balanced out.
It was super interesting in this one to watch sort of the progression that it started with the local stations here saying, well, it's just these two stores, although one of the local stations said closing all the stores in Portland, and then that got picked up to the national, and as it was passed on further, it became closing all the stores in Portland because of this big theft problem.
Right, yeah. Well, when you get a story, there's so many different ways that you can go through that headline. One person may read that and see the elements and the information that comes out, and they approach it one way versus another person might see something different. When we're approaching headlines in our team, we're basically starting with what are the facts? What's the interesting thing that people are going to be looking through? What's the human impact? But then we balance that out with what are the facts, what's the context and nuance that has to be worked into this as well, if that's the only glimpse of the story that people are going to be getting just through that headline on our website or on their feeds.
Thank you, Celeste Ruiz, KGW's digital director, for your time and your insights. That was terrific.
Thanks, Pat.
Still to come on the story, it's the final installment of our Counseled Inside Our School series. Christine Pitawanich will talk with me about her takeaways from reporting on the mental health issues inside our schools. We'll even feature some of your thoughts. And then later, we'll take a look at a little frog. Looks harmless, right? Well, not so much. It's being called potentially invasive, and the State Department of Fish and Wildlife has a warning that you should be aware of. Those stories are coming up next when the story returns. All this week, we've been hearing from Counseled Inside Our School with Christine Pinawadich. This is the wrap up now. What are some of the big takeaways that you got from reporting and working on this series?
I think in general, what I heard from the counselors that I spoke to is that things seem to be better this year than they were last year. Of course, that's when the kids were coming back to in-person school after a couple of years of learning outside of the classroom. I think what surprised me was, one, I mean, a lot of these students are continuing to deal with anxiety, depression. So yeah, big issues there. Also, what surprised me, the youngest kids at the elementary level, they're dealing with a lot, with grief if they've lost someone. I was very surprised and intrigued to be able to speak to some of these young kids about some really big issues and big feelings. Also, to learn that there are suicide prevention posters in the 4th and 5th grade bathrooms at Sitten Elementary.
I wish that was not necessary, but apparently it is.
Of course, and I mean, it's got the suicide prevention hotline, 988. The counselor there told me that there have been students who have talked about self-harm at the middle school level. These kids are under a lot of pressure too. I mean, you're transitioning from being a kid to a teenager. One 13-year-old told me that they felt a lot of pressure, feeling like if they messed something up, then it would totally impact the rest of their life. So those are some of the takeaways and things that surprised me, I think, while I was sitting down with these students and counselors and talking to them about what they were dealing with. But I was also inspired, right? Inspired by these kids and teens who were remaining so positive, even though they were feeling so anxious or maybe so depressed about certain things, and inspired by these counselors who are really helping these kids in the ways that they can, even if sometimes they're feeling, you know, like they need more help, or they're just kind of working to make sure these kids are feeling okay. But here are some of the poignant thoughts that some of these counselors had to say to wrap things up.
I mean, there's never enough of us. We are very fortunate to have like a mental health provider that comes in once a week that does therapy with kids, but we don't have a social worker, so that means that our counseling staff does all of the social work for our school.
I think we're struggling as a community here in Portland, in our Tri-County area. We're struggling as a state and we're struggling as a nation to provide care, especially for children who are struggling with their mental health.
That would be my wish for the future, is getting students the supports they need fully in school and outside of school.
Anytime we do stories like these, we get feedback from folks because it touches you out in the audience. And Christine, I know you've been seeing some. What are people telling you?
Well, we have been talking to people on social media, and we've been hearing back from some folks. On Instagram, one person says locking kids out of schools for 2 years has damaged their ability to socialize in a healthy way. The addiction to social media and constant attention has damaged them. Another person saying, my guess is long-term mental health of children needs to be fixed by helping parents' mental health. An interesting concept there. On Facebook, Karen Barberin says mental health is terrible. After my child was kept out of a classroom for a year, she completely stopped talking, lost ability to maintain friendships, and lost years of social development. She's still struggling socially despite a ton of effort on our part to help. So very obviously, very impactful on a lot of these parents and kids, and still, according to counselors and mental health professionals, a lot of work to be done in the mental health sphere in school districts and really across the state, Pat.
Well, it's great reporting. Thanks so much for highlighting this, Christine. By the way, if you missed any of Christine's segments this week on mental health in schools, no problem. We got you covered. You can watch all of them right now on our streaming service on Roku and Amazon Fire. It's called KGW+. They're also available on the KGW YouTube channel and KGW.com. Still to come on The Story, a tiny stowaway found in a plant at a Beaverton area nursery got a lot of attention from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Why a harmless-looking little tree frog is being tagged as potentially invasive. We'll take a look at the threat it could pose to the environment and humans when The Story returns. This week, one of our producers' kids, Blakely, was watching the remake of the Magic School Bus show on Netflix. And Ms. Frizzle was telling the kids about invasive species and the damage they can do to native species and the habitats they invade. And Ms. Frizzle's lessons reminded our producer of an email that we got from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife recently. It talked about an invasive species that was found in a tropical plant recently sold at a nursery in the Beaverton area. Check it out. This is a Cuban tree frog. Right now, the state is calling it non-native and potentially invasive. They sent out a warning to all nursery plant retailers and to customers to inspect products for these critters and to let ODFW know if you find one. This is actually the second time the species has entered the state through the supply chain. The first time was in 2021 when 2 of the frogs were also found in nursery plants.
A lot of invasive species get moved around through cargo containers, plant species, humans moving it around, and you never know which one will actually do some damage in Oregon or other places in the United States. Fortunately, the Cuban tree frog is not one that at this time will be invasive, but it's in this area where it's been invasive in Florida. It's now moving north, so with climate change, it could potentially become invasive at one time in Oregon.
Okay, still a long ways away though, but Boatner says the species could possibly survive here in the summer months, but likely would not live through the cold, damp winter. But with climate change, as he mentioned, they are preparing for potential negative effects from these frogs.
This one, if ever got established in Oregon, they're what are called gap feeders. So if it can fit in their mouth, they're going to eat it, which means could be our native frogs, small birds, small lizards. If it can fit, they'll eat it. So they can be a predator on our native species, similar to bullfrogs that we already have established in Oregon.
And it's not just native species and habitats to worry about. The Cuban tree frogs can secrete a mucus that irritates your eyes and nose. It can also cause allergy-like symptoms that can be severe.
A lot of amphibians secrete a mucus for defense. Even our rough-skinned newt, which is native, will secrete this mucus, and that's mainly to make them distasteful. So the predator will let them go. But if somebody's allergic to it, it could cause a bad reaction, similar to if somebody was allergic to a bee sting.
That doesn't sound fun. So if you find a Cuban tree frog or what you think might be a Cuban tree frog, do not release it into the wild, they tell us. Get in touch instead with ODFW by calling the Oregon Invasive Species Hotline. That's 1-866-INVADER, or by visiting OregonInvasivesHotline.org. We'll keep that info at the bottom of the screen for you for the rest of the segment. And much like a criminal bounty back in the Old West, Rick Boatner says the critter can be identified dead or alive.
If they can keep it alive, that's fine. One is to take good pictures of it to send us. Fuzzy pictures make it difficult to ID. And you want to, when you take photographs of it, you want to take the back, the head, the stomach area. Those all can help us ID what the species is. Dead species work too. You can turn it into us, and that way we have it in hand, so that even makes it easier to ID.
Boatner says if live specimens are turned in, they generally have to euthanize the creature. In the case of this most recent tree frog, the person who found it decided, kind of cute and cuddly, I'm going to make it a pet, which Boatner says is pretty good result for the Cuban frog. He says making pets of invasive species can be an option depending on the risk of the species flourishing here. There's very specific criteria for low, medium, and high risk, and right now the Cuban tree frog is considered low risk. But Ms. Frizzle from the Magic School Bus and Rick Boatner agree invasive species are not to be taken lightly.
Some of these species, once they get here, there's nothing we can do about it. So it's difficult to do control or eradication. We don't have silver bullets for everything now.
Interesting stuff. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. The KGW Great Food Drive is underway. You have already provided nearly 500,000 meals, but our goal is 1.2 million. Last year, more than 1.5 million people in Oregon and Southwest Washington sought food assistance from the Oregon Food Bank Network. One way to help, make a donation at the Rivermark Community Credit Union branch. And all this week, when you give at Rivermark, they will double your donation. To see all the ways to donate, or if you need assistance, visit kgw.com/food drive. We also want to thank the local Toyota dealers, Pacific Office Automation, and Safeway for supporting this year's food drive. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. By the way, I'm taking a reporting trip to Eastern Oregon next week. I'll be sending some videos back to give you a preview of what I'm working on there. Meanwhile, our team has great shows planned for you Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Be sure to tune in. I'll be back on Thursday.